I'm going to ramble. I've been doing this for close to 35 years now. I'm going to talk mostly about the arcade side, but before I ever wandered into this industry, I was a filmmaker. And then I became an animator, because a little more control there. And I answered an ad one day for Bally, and I thought, you know, must need pinball back glass people. So I went in and they said, hey, you know, we're going to give you a job, real job, you know. And pay you money, you know, healthcare, the whole 9 yards. And all you got to do is make art animation for video games. And video games were at the Pac-Man level at that time. And I went, oh, thank you. That's very nice. And I was really kind of crushed. I'm a pen and ink kind of artist, and I didn't really see any, you know, what I could do at that point, and I thought childhood was pretty much over, because I'd been doing, you know, ads for newspapers and coming up with little characters and all that kind of stuff and having fun just drawing. And I thought childhood was over. I mean, I hung up the phone and I kind of made a joke out of it to one of my friends, and I almost cried, because it was just like, that's it. You know, I can't keep working for beer and peanuts. I've got to take this job. And I was so wrong. Childhood has continued for the next 35 years. Midway hired me, and it was the best time to stumble into what has been just a marvelous way to live. Not just to earn a living, but to live. I started as an animator. The first game I ever worked on was Deathmatch. Deathmatch was supposed to be in Tron, the original, but the programmer was a perfectionist. And Bob Dinnerman, great programmer, and if any of you are familiar with the game, with really low powered hardware, he created a totally immersive 3D experience. And it, you know, no game is just one person ever. But he was a really dedicated programmer, and it was a great start for me because he knew exactly what he wanted to the last detail, and the combination of that with the silver mirror effect put this monitor, you didn't see a monitor, you saw this space in front of you that was alive, and it was a wonderful first game to jump in. And when I say first game, that's a little misleading, because while I'm working on that, as an artist, I'm working on 5 other guys' games at once. So Bob is one programmer, and I'm working on something, and I'm working on a Dudley Do-Right game over here, and I'm working on this game called Mothership that was bombing. They had decided to cancel the game, and I said, look, it's a very ugly little game with very realistic characters. Stayed there late a couple nights, changed every character in the game, reskinned it, and it became Cosmic Cruiser, which did very, very well. And again, George Gomez on the cabinet side and control side, he's now pinball designer at Stern, but back then he was kind of the heart and soul of the early group. He used the silver mirror effect again very well, and Cosmic Cruiser became so popular that they spun off the character into Wacko. I don't know if any of you guys remember Wacko, but one of the Dave Nutting and Associates and Marvin Glass were doing games for Bally at the time, and one or the other, I can't remember who, but they did Wacko. Now, the nice thing about those days is you could touch anything you wanted. We were all still figuring things out. Bally Midway had money. They hired us. They left us alone. I asked somebody, where did the designs come from? Well, we got this stack of papers over here. I said, oh, this looks great. This is like real-time war, but it's with ants. And it's like, yeah, but that's so ugly. So I said, wait a minute, we can do this right. So, again, on my own, put together a full-on multiplayer battle game. The premise was simple. There are ants in a junkyard fighting over the food in the middle, and if you don't get enough food back to your queen, she dies. And it was a tremendously fun 2-player game. Unfortunately, the programmer on that never came up with a single-player AI, so it went out to test as a 2-player game. And in those days especially, it didn't earn anywhere enough to get released. So not everything that we tried was a success. And in the back room, programmer Tom Leone was working on a game while I'm doing these other games. I'm doing little missiles and I'm doing helicopters and I'm saying, hey, let's add a boat to this. And that game didn't have a name, but it was just the driving game in the back room. And it was there for the first year and a half I was there. And these little shots, I mean, you can tell, these little shots will tell you, this is what the team was like. I mean, these guys, we were given hey, you've got to write everything down in your book now to keep this stuff official. Come up with a name for Spy Hunter. I don't know if you can read all of these, and many are not for publication, but we were the type of group that, and then of course you got to sign your thing, and then someone else had to witness it. We all had these new notebooks, and this was all the notebook was ever used for, was I think the first day they gave us to us. We worked like, we worked to do some pretty, we have to agree, they're pretty awful names, and fortunately they didn't listen to any of us, and someone in marketing called it Spy Hunter. And then the only reason, I'm going to back up one thing, this one was, my buddy Steve came up with that one, and I like that one a lot, because Spy Hunter, of course, is a realistic looking game, and I had no, other than missiles and gameplay elements that I contributed. So I said, okay, yeah, that's the name we're going to go with. So I came up with Battle Scars, which of course went right into the toilet. But that was my proposal for Spy Hunter art, and thank goodness they didn't listen to me there either. This was what everybody knows and recognizes, and part of the fun of this. Now, in these early days, none of us were designers. You're not designers. You're an animator. You're this. You're this. You're this. So, you know, the thing had Leone engine and a GG this and BC missiles, and we would hide our names literally in places here and there. One of the programmers I worked with, by this time we kind of gravitated together. I worked with a lot of them. I worked on Demolition Derby with a programmer named Jeff Now. Jeff started out, his first game I think he worked on was Satan's Hollow. He did hundreds and hundreds of patterns. We came up with Demo Derby, and my artistic contribution to that was the girls in t-shirts and the skin tight in between rack stuff on that, and little stuff like that. From Demo Derby, he and I decided to do Sarge. Sarge was a return to, for those of you that remember it, return to one player controlling a tank and a helicopter, and you run back and forth between both. So again, that idea going back to Ant Raid, we said, hey, let's do this. Sarge did real well, and again, you know, my pixel art, and if you had the right ROM set, you could even make the t-shirt disappear, but that's another story. Side art on that looks very similar to my art, but it's not my art. I was not doing cabinet art yet. I was not doing flyer art yet. Kevin O'Connor, great pinball artist, he was the head of the video artist when I was hired. He did that, what I think is terrific side art for Sarge. Now, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. Okay? I liked pushing our hardware. Our hardware couldn't do much, and it couldn't scale, it couldn't scroll, but we figured out that if we shrunk a bunch of our foreground elements, and they wanted a track and field game, so you run along the ground and you're eating watermelons left and right, and then you leap into the air and you glide, and you fly, and you've got this bikini-clad woman on your back who throws a boomerang at your enemies, and you, the bird, can spit watermelon seeds at these big, mostly invisible killer bees. Now, doesn't that sound like a slam dunk? I mean, I ask you, I don't know why that one didn't take off. Part of the problem there was the bees were invisible because we ran out of pictures, enough foreground, and so unless the bee was right next to you, we made him invisible. So yeah, it didn't stand a chance. So just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And that shouldn't be there. So let's go past it. All right. Rampage. Rampage, the story of Rampage, I get asked about probably the most because it's of the games I did. It broke all the records for earnings. And Rampage was the result of, once again, them telling us we couldn't do something. Myself and Sharon and Jim Belt, who's here with Stern today, we're sitting in a room after a trade show, and I said, why can't we do animating backgrounds? I want to do some stuff, and it's like, you can't. It's like, why not? No, you can't do animating backgrounds. Why not? Well, because they got to be rectangles. So I looked at Sharon, and I said, okay, a building falling into itself. That's an animating rectangle. That's an animating background. We cover up the bottom with a little dust cloud. And now, finally, I could do big characters. Because as you can tell from my pen and ink work, and this was actually the first write-up. Write-ups in those days were a page, maybe two. But again, we knew, or I knew, this is why this is next year's #1 game. Went to my boss. No. So, got to take no for an answer. I went to his boss, head of engineering. I love the game, but there's nothing out there like it, so no. And just then, the upper management transitioned to a new president of the company who gave a speech about a week later, 2 weeks later, and said, and again, I already started creating George, because that's how confident I was we were going to be able to do this. And he says, I've got an open door policy, was in his opening speech to the company. I was in his room the next morning. And he gave the thing a green light, and then the result, if I may be so not humble, is history. This game broke every earnings record to date. It had to be taken out of places because kids were crowding around it so much. So, and because there wasn't much in the way of hardware, so we named everything, everybody knows, we named all the levels after towns. So I said to marketing, I said, hey, write to all these towns and write a press release. They said, no, it's a worst waste of time. So myself, well, Jeff and I basically wrote that last thing you just saw, and the result were at least 50 articles all over the country, minimum, that I got copies of, at least 4 television things I know of, and this is back in the day when we were using US mail. So it was a huge success, and our marketing thing we did on our own, and I think that's part of why Rampage had a good spread around the company. Now, a lot of people ask me, I have nothing to do with any of my games. A lot of my games are on a lot of systems. I have nothing to do with them. The only thing I really have to do with my games as far as home games is, I get them, I look at them, and I judge how cool the box art is. Now, oh man, they did a much better job than I did, or oh no, that's not as good. Usually they do a much better. And then today, so it has endured. Now, around about the same time as Rampage, I was working on kind of a Dungeons and Dragons themed game in which you walked around and you explored and you picked up items, and some of them were spells, and if you cast them in the right place. And it's a very difficult and addictive little game, and we actually gave you 10 lives. You had a book of life. And it was called Zwackery. And just recently I restored one for an arcade up in Chicago, and he asked me to redo the art. So I now have side art and cabinet art, but I kept the original, half of the, Pat McMahon did a great job on that. And, okay, now I've got to slow this down just a minute. Sorry, and take a drink. Okay, we'll go back to Zwackery. Zwackery, this is my name drop story, so I gotta share this. Zwackery was around the same time as Rampage, and still, as I say, nobody was a designer. And they were bringing Nolan Bushnell through, and Nolan, he walked into the cubicle where we were doing this, and Emil and I were, showing him the game, and management came in and said, and this is, Emil Golan, the programmer, and this is Brian Colin, the designer. To Nolan Bushnell. I went out the very next day, put designer on my business cards, and been a pain in everybody's butt ever since. But, okay, so that's my little Nolan Bushnell story. And then I fought with him for 20 minutes after that while the management moved on because he wanted to make improvements to my game. But it was very good natured. He's a sweet guy. We had a good time, although people were peering over their cubicles wondering what all the shouting was about. But I digress. This next game has been getting some press recently. If anybody remembers Bally's Astron Belt and some of these other really terrible laser games that they were just kind of getting from anywhere, as a film guy I said, hey, I can do a Laserdisc game. I did a bunch of us there in the office. Sharon Perry, by the way, she taught me, when I was hired, she taught me how to use the art tools, and she is one of the vampires in here, and she put the bow on this Pac-Man, so just so you know that, Sharon. We did a Super 8 interactive film. They loved it. They gave us a little minimum budget, and we created an hour-long interactive film based on a text adventure I'd written years earlier. And now, and back then, just as we were finishing editing of the film, Midway was bringing out a new NFL. It was supposed to be a Laserdisc game, but they used video disc instead. And video disc has a needle. So the first time somebody bumped their new NFL cabinet, they had a $4,000 doorstop in their arcade. So Midway made the decision to not do any more disc games right around the time I finished this. I recently mentioned it to, I don't know if any of you guys know Doc Mack at the Galloping Ghost arcade up in Chicago. He heard I still had the original footage, and we're currently in the process of finishing the game. We showed a playable demo the other day. It is the live action film with, as it would have been. And that, I'm hoping, will be finished in the next couple months. So I'm jumping ahead here 35 years, but okay. After Rampage, and again, it's hard for me to even talk about a lot of this stuff because one of the great things about being an artist is you were working on multiple games with multiple programmers. Xenophobe, I had a new programmer, wanted to be a pinball programmer, but they assigned him to this game we were going to do, and it was originally a pyramid game, exploring pyramids. He likes sci-fi. Great. Aliens just came out. Let's do Xenophobe, okay? And Xenophobe was similar to Zwackery, if you go back in that. If you played Xenophobe, picking things up, using them in different places. And people have asked me too about some of the posters I've got out there at my booth. The posters are all from our original, whenever we did a new game, I would do a shirt for the game. And Bally would let me do that because I was paid for it. But, so that's where why those posters out there have that design means so much to me. Again, since this was after Rampage, they let me do the cabinet art as well. So again, the cabinet art, the header, this is my art now, and by this time, we'd gotten to the point where I was gaining more control. I was not anybody's boss, so everybody's still very peer-to-peer. If you want this programmer to do something, you buy him a beer. If you wanted this programmer to do something, you beg and you beg and you beg, and So, but it was very much in these days a wonderful time to make games because all of us were learning from each other. It wasn't a programming department and an art department and a music department. It was, what are you doing there? Why are you doing this? Wouldn't this make me go? Artists could come in and help programmers solve their logic problems because they look at things different, and vice versa. Programmers could come and say, I can do this on the programming side. You don't have to do all of those simple rotations because I can automate a thing that will do. So everybody knew about what everybody else was doing, so it was a wonderful time to make games. It was a wonderful time to become a designer. Okay, and to this day, I'm still doing this, And everybody I ever hired, no matter how great a programmer they are, no matter how great an artist or a modeler, it's like, that's great. That's all. You want to do that? You have to, if you're going to come work for me, you're going to learn to become a designer because it makes the process better for everyone. And I've had tremendous teams over the last 25 years, which is once Jeff and I formed Game Refuge. Cool. Okay, and then this is why I love to come to these kinds of shows. I was unaware of the kind of resurgence in the arcade. Like I said, I've been doing games, and my business model is do what you're doing until somebody taps you on the shoulder. So over the last 25 years, did arcade games, then we're doing countertop games, then we're doing one thing or the other, and then we're doing casino games. Before you know it, we're doing Facebook games or mobile games. But the arcade was always the place where I'm standing in the back, Jeff and I, or the programmer, whoever it might have been, but standing in the back watching people play, and you got to see what made them smile. You got to see what ticked them off. You got to see why they reached for another corner, and this is what I live for. There's nothing in any of the games I've done since, you know, for EA and a lot of great people, focus groups, test reports, it's not the same. Standing in the arcade watching someone light up as they get it, or the front, you know, and you learn things both ways. I mean, you learn even if they're walking away, why did they walk away? And I'm not talking about walking up and asking questions, I'm just talking about observing and interpreting what you're seeing. And it's been a wonderful way. The whole arcade experience, that first decade, I started in '82, that first decade was a wonderful time to learn to make games. Because we had to tune them, a game just didn't have to be fun on the player side. The operator wants those people off in 90 seconds. They want to live forever. I got to do both. Now here's a game around that same time, or shortly after Xenophobe. Jeff and I teaming up again on this one. They needed a game very quickly for an international conference. So we put together a kind of a laser tag game where you're shooting at the people across from you. It bombed horribly. So we said, get rid of the Olympic event type thing, and basically the game lasted, if any of you have ever seen it, fairly rare game, just let you snipe through apartment windows, and everything in the game, every window you shot in, that's embarrassing. Say hi to my wife when you come out to my booth, that's her. This guy, I don't know who he is, but Ray's out there, and I will go back to Rampage. Any of you that remember the original Rampage, those three little heads that come out? George, Lizzie, and Ralph. I was George, Ray was Lizzie, and Ralph was Jeff. International Team Laser became blasted because you could shoot everything and everything did something funny, and it was a cute, enjoyable, multiplayer, head-to-head game. We did some games, we were asked to do games over time, sometimes that we probably shouldn't have done. Max RPM was one of them. It involved having a clutch and just doing a quarter-mile track, and the hardware couldn't really support it. I put this up here because I don't know if any of you remember the Pack kits. But we did. They decided at one point that Pac-Man was going away and would never come back. So let's do kits that use the same limited hardware that Pac-Man did. And I did a couple of those games with a couple different programmers. Shoot the Bull was a darts game, and Jump Shot was a basketball game. And that's only in here because I liked it. Now, a lot of times I'm the concept guy. We co-design a lot of stuff with Jeff Nauman or with the programmer, but in this case, Jeff Nauman. In this case, Jeff was the concept guy. He came off a flight from Philly with a barf bag and says, it's all here. He had written it down, and he decided to use our one player controlling multiple players to do real basketball strategies. Pick and roll, and I don't even know what that means, but because I'm not a sports guy, but I love the concept, of course. It was multiplayers. We were delighted you know, and they gave us the green light, because by then they were pretty happy with the games like Rampage that we put together and stuff. So they gave us the green light. We did our trials. The only thing I said to Jeff is, since I'm not a sports guy, I want to add one thing. I want the ability to foul. So that is why our trials, and I love this art. I wish I could say I did that, but I did not do that. But the foul, the pulling down the pants, the flying tackles, that side of things was me. Because with all of my games, earnings in the arcade, well, earnings in the arcade is about getting them that next quarter. My way to do that was humor. Other people use different methods. Pigskin was our follow-up to Rampage. It was our rivals rather. And Pigskin 621 AD. 621 is Jeff and was Jeff's anniversary, and that's just how we pulled that in. Another marvelous cabinet from the guys in the department, and just Dan Forden did some of my favorite music is in Pigskin. It's just a very anyway. I don't do it justice. Well, we did a lot of marketing stuff for this as well. At the end of the game, for those of you who remember, there was a P.O. box, and you could get a Pigskin board tabletop game. You could get a Pigskin player's handbook or T-shirts or hats, just for the fun. We like that aspect of things. Pigskin was to be a football game, but our new employers, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, said, no, we've already got a football game in the works. So we said, okay, we'll make it rugby, and no, that would be too similar. I said, no, we'll make it really different. So that is why Pigskin is, features decapitation and setting people on fire, and all the other things you've come to know and love from rugby are no rules. Now, it was taken a little far. This is an example of a home game that I didn't get at all. They took basically my art in the game and ported it over completely, but it was Jerry Glanville's Pigskin. And not being a sports guy, I had no idea that he was just a football coach with a bad reputation. So, but what do you do? They get out of your hands. Our job, and the best part of my job, is making the games. Now, I did want to stop here because, or I'm pausing here because back during Rampage, Midway was bought by their biggest competitor. Williams bought Valley Midway. And I was fortunate, Jeff Nauman and I were fortunate enough to be the only two video game designers they kept. We finished Arch Rivals for them, we finished Pigskin for them, and then I had been fending off an offer from EA for about a year, about 6 months, to come work for them, but I did not want to move to California. I'm crazy, I like snow in this winter, I like heat in the summer and humidity. I'm a Chicago area guy. So we left Midway, the new Midway, Williams Valley Midway, under very good terms, and formed our own company, Game Refuge. And we went out to California, sight unseen, never met any of these people, they didn't know what game we were going to do, and we went out there with a game that was unlike anything on 16-bit, certainly on Sega, and walked into this room full of people and pitched them the idea for a game, what floats my boat, a real-time strategy game where 2 players or 4 players can control a whole squad of people. Similar to what you saw in Pigskin, you're controlling all teams, similar to our Rivals. General Chaos was their number 1 independent title that year, or the year, the next year. They loved it. Fortunately, they loved it because it was a big risk, quitting your job and going out to the coast and everything. They loved General Chaos. It did very well for them. I think the only thing they said during the meeting was, "Could we make it street games?" And I said, "No." I said, "I got little kids, fantasy, this kind of nebulous, first part of the century war." Background is not reality. I don't want people doing street games. That's just too close. So my kids thing, impacts where I'll draw. decapitation is fine as long as it's funny, you know? I mean, there are some lines I will not cross. Now, after we did General Chaos, we did a couple more games started a couple more games for EA. Midway had been asking us every time we'd see him at a trade show, when are you going to come do something for us? We started a project for them, and then they said, we need something for a broader range of people, because we've got, you know, our fighting games now where we're ripping spines out, but we need something that more people, so Jeff and I said, let's redo Rampage. And so that was beautiful because with the original Rampage, we didn't have much power to do much storyline or background or anything like that. So we kind of went over the top with this game in terms of tons of hidden stuff, tons of, you know, there's a big long movie at the end that was so risque that they cut it out of several of the home versions. Because once the monsters shrink back down, one of them bounced off of the bosom of the astronaut. So this did very well. And again, this is what a lot of people remember. A lot of what I've done to today's audiences, they only know through home games. Almost a lot of my games have been in this collection or that collection or this collection. I don't know what people know more. I often think that they know Rampage World Tour more than they know Rampage. Both were fun to do for completely different reasons. Jeff talked us into doing a demo derby one time. Tip, if you're ever doing a demo derby, don't paint logos and bring out a character for your car, because you know what everybody else does when they start the thing up? They all head for your car. So you don't want to do that. And again, Rampage went to lots of different systems, and during this time we were a real company. We had several artists, several programmers working for us, probably about 16 people at that time. We were in 2 locations. We eventually got down to 1 location because what we learned early on was that it didn't work to separate your people. You want that synchronicity. You want them bouncing stuff off of it. After Rampage, we approached Midway and said, hey, you've got this great countertop thing. Let's do 3D looking games, you know? And they said no. So we went to Merit. Merit's earnings quadrupled. We did 4 games for them, and they quadrupled the year we released this game that, you know, it's a sprite-based game, but it looked like we were playing in 3D, so. So that went over really well. And I don't know if I've already mentioned this, but our business model has always been pretty simple. We work until somebody asks us to do something else. As these will show, we were then tapped by somebody who said, hey, you know, I just took over a division at IGT, I'm making video slots, I want you to help my people learn how to make slot machines look more fun. So we did a bunch of games for IGT and for WMS gaming, and the fun thing about that is there is the royalties. The royalties on this side, they had such efficient manufacturing processes that they could spit out a game a year and a half, 2 years, 5 years down the road, just because they had the stock and they would run it down the factory line. Whereas traditionally, prior to that, you got to get all your games sold and then we're on to something else. So it was nice doing the games for these guys because, well, for one thing, yeah, the royalties continued. I'm more on these royalties than any of my much bigger games, just because they produced them for 10 years. Okay, and now we moved past the arcade side of this for the most part, until I was approached by someone who said, hey, I've got the Star Trek Voyager license, will you do us a gun game? And it was a riot to do. I said, I'll do it as long as I can come up with my own characters, so we got to do our own kind of villains for it. It was going to be a rail game, which there's probably 30 different ways to play through it. And all hidden triggers and everything else. So my design contribution to this mainly was scripting and storyboarding. The modelers, I'm not a modeler. The modelers on this were fantastic, and fortunately some of them were huge Trekkies. I was out of Paramount picking up material, and the producer and myself and one of my artists, were touring in one of the closed set. It wasn't a closed set as in they were live, it was an empty set in the dark. We're walking through and just kind of looking at stuff and taking pictures. And around the corner, face to face, almost bumped into him, a very angry, cigar-chomping LeVar Burton. What the hell are you doing back here? And and the producer's no help at all. He's just looking at me like I'm supposed to say something. Well, we're doing a game, and I'm stammering, and Ben, God love him, LeVar, episode 142, the something of Blackman's shop, and you directed that, and that is the absolute best of your 9 episodes that you've directed, and it's just like, cigar come out, big smile, shows us around the next. Ben saved our bacon that day. It was wonderful. It was wonderful. This started out to be a gun game, spell-based gun game that we thought would be a nice follow-up for team play after they released Star Trek Voyager, but it went nowhere. The only reason I even put it up here is because of that little goblin guy who we'll return to later. We were doing a lot of other stuff. I typically, over the years, whether originally for Midway or on our own, anybody taps us on the shoulder, let's do it. We were doing a game for Lutheran girls about distributing food after a crisis. We did a game about a kick punch in which you're Moses beating the crap out of the Pharaoh's minions, as and you can call down God's wrath, and it was hysterical. It was fun. It was a fun game. I'm not sure they knew their market, or I'm not sure they never really made any top of any charts. But this Komatsu challenge, we were approached, and the group said, here's my budget. It was a modest budget, but it was substantial enough that they said we want a top view little, like N64 of one of our trucks. And I said, well, what's your lead time? Because a lot of, it's always time, money, content is the game development triangle. This is what we gave. This is what we gave. They had over a year lead time. I did this with just a couple of people. Like I say, working on several games at once. A stage show that at their trade show, their annual trade show, we would have hundreds of people every day lining up, thousands over the period of the week, and they did it for 6 years. They did it for 6 years. It was a riot. It was nothing more than driving one of their 40-ton capacity trucks, the ones with the tires like that tall. And they were all racing against each other. Now the challenge, and I love design challenges, the challenges here, the people coming here are not their wives and husbands who work in the construction industry. They're not video game players. I had to make this game feel like they were controlling every aspect of it, and still they felt like they could go anywhere, do anything, and I would gently pull them back, or if they went this way, I'd pull them to a secret. The game would pull them where they need to go. And this is, the other reason I like to bring this up from an independent developer standpoint is, not only did they want a very small game, and I said, no, for that money, we can do a much bigger game, believe me. We can feature all your products in the background, we can have 3 monitors up here, you can have their face here, and a live camera feed here, and then all the players are seeing from their own view. And they said, great, but we don't want the cars to touch. We don't want the trucks to touch. Okay, we'll come back to this one. And they have a top speed when they're at full capacity of 4 miles an hour. So we kind of went along with it, and said, do you mind a downhill course, and can we let, you know, gravity take hold and thereby get a little extra mileage that way? Because doing a race game at 4 miles an hour, I didn't really think was going to give us a whole lot to work with. Yeah, they're fine. So the first time we showed them a playable demo, by the time you get to the bottom of this mountain event, these 40-ton trucks are lofting into the air about 50, 60 feet. They're and then about halfway through the development, I said, I gotta ask, why can't they touch? Because this is player to player. You know, they're going to want to collide into it. We don't want the paint to scratch. So I said, don't worry, I think we can make sure that the paint doesn't scratch off the virtual trucks. So this was a joy to work on. And remember, I was talking about how much I loved the arcade and the experience of watching. That was a wet dream for 6 years. Probably not the best way to say that. I was standing there watching thousands of people line up and play that game, and they weren't game players necessarily. And the line for it would wrap around their booth and halfway down the hall. We did another game, again, every game I've ever done has been a client handing us money, we go make the game. I had the idea for a multiplayer land game on vehicles with heat-seeking missiles. And I love deathmatch games, but I hated that there was no secondary logic to it. So it's like, okay, well, what if these poker cards are out there all over this 9 square mile area? You can see where they are on the radar, but you can't see what it is till you get close. And then as you pick them up, people can see what hands you're forming. So if you've got my ace, you're a dead man. I'm finding you, I'm hunting you down. It was and is a hysterical game, but we produced it on our own dime and lost my shirt. You can get it for free at arcticstud.com. Download it, it's unlocked. The client, or the people that eventually bought this game and released it straight into the $10 bills bins at Kmart type thing. So I misread the level of, I don't know what I misread. It's a fun game, and if you know anybody else that still plays land games, it's one of my favorite multiplayer games to play, because there's no end to the strategy. I mean, and then the backstory is, you know, it's a brewery, and the Necronomicon and Stephen King influences, and it's all